Okay, so here's the warm-up for today. It says, given the following words, sort them into 2 categories. On your whiteboard, we're just going to do this in your notebook, and it says name and label your categories. So you have sweater, pants, sweatshirt, gym shorts, that should go together, t-shirt, skirt, dress shirt, and sweatpants. So go ahead and sort those, and then we can look at your 2 categories. Go ahead and press pause. All right, so the 2 categories I would come up with would be clothes that go on the top of your body and clothes that go on the bottom part of your body. All right, so the clothes that go on the top half of your body, I'm going to circle in green. So a sweatshirt, sweater, t-shirt, dress shirt. So the bottom half, I would say gym shorts, pants, skirt, and sweatpants. All right. So today, how can I identify and classify quadrilaterals based on their attributes? So we're going to look at quadrilaterals. So everyone's going to take out their foldable and go ahead and open it to the inside. This is going to be your first little page. It says properties of parallelograms. So all of these things are what make an object a parallelogram. So the first thing something has to have in order to be a parallelogram is opposite sides are parallel. So parallel means that the sides do not ever touch or cross. So the way you note that is we have these special little symbols that look like the end of an arrow. So these 2 sides are parallel, and then I have to do something a little different to show that these 2 sides are parallel to each other, but not parallel to these. So I can't use 1 arrowhead. Instead, I'll just use 2. So now we know this side's parallel to this, and this side is parallel to this side. The next attribute is opposite sides are congruent. Congruent just means equal. So the way you show that is you just make 1 little hash mark. So these are opposite, so those 2 sides are congruent. And the way I can show that the other 2 are congruent with one another, opposite, but not necessarily all 4 are the same, because they don't all 4 have to be the same for a parallelogram. This side is going to get 2 hash marks because it is congruent to this side. So that lets you know that the opposite sides are congruent, but not necessarily all 4 are congruent. The third trait is opposite angles are congruent. So opposite angles means angles that are opposite of one another. So we're going to mark it with a little circle and then 1 hash mark to show that this angle is congruent to this angle. And now I need to do something a little different to show that these 2 opposite angles are congruent. So I'm just going to make 2 hash marks. So that lets me know that opposite angles are congruent, or as we've already talked about, they're equal. And another attribute of a parallelogram is all of the measurements of these inside angles are going to add up to 360 degrees. So if you took the measurement of angle 1 plus the measurement of 2 plus the measurement of 3 plus the measurement of 4, it's always going to give you 360 degrees. And lastly, diagonals bisect each other. So what that means is that they are going to cut each other in half. So when we say half, that means we have 2 equal parts. So here's where they cut each other in half. This side is going to be exactly equal to this side, and this is equal to this. That means the diagonals have bisected. This point right here cut this into 2 equal parts, and this point cut this part into 2 equal parts. All right, so flip your page to the rectangle. So for something to be a rectangle, it's going to have all of the attributes of a parallelogram. So opposite angles are parallel, opposite sides are congruent, opposite angles are congruent, Angles add up to 360 and diagonals bisect each other. But in order for it to be a rectangle, it's going to have a couple of extra things. So 4 right angles, the way you show that is you have these little squares in the corner. And what that means is that it has 90 degrees. Right angles mean 90 degrees. Next, for it to be a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent. Parallelogram doesn't have to have that. What that means is if you measure from one angle to the other, the length is the exact same from the other angle to the bottom angle. Those are the extra requirements for a shape to be a rectangle. Next, we have a rhombi or rhombus, so you can flip to the next page. So a rhombus also has all the 5 properties of a parallelogram, so all of these things, and then it has a couple extra things also. So 4 congruent sides, that means they're equal. So the way you'll show that is all 4 have the same little hash mark. Diagonals are perpendicular, that means they meet at 90-degree angles. So when these diagonals cross each other, they form 90-degree angles at the point that they cross. So you put those little squares in there to show that it's 90 degrees. And lastly, diagonals bisect opposite angles. Bisect means they're going to cut them in half. So these 2 angles are bisect, that means they're going to be equal. And they're also going to be equal to these 2. And these 2 angles are cut in half. They're equal, but they're also equal to the angles that are opposite of them. All right, next we have squares. So squares have all the properties of a parallelogram. It has all the properties of a rhombi. And these are wrong, so I need you to mark these off. Just made a mistake. And these are the 2 properties of a rectangle. It has 4 right angles. Write this on your foldable. Oh. Angles. And diagonals are congruent. So for something to be a square, it has to have the properties of the parallelogram, properties of a rhombi, and the properties of a rectangle. So lastly, we have the trapezoid. So exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. That's different than a parallelogram. So remember, parallel, we have these little arrows. They do not cross, do not touch. Make sure you're writing everything on your foldable. Angles add up to 360. So once again, if you take the measurement of all of these angles, it adds up to 360 degrees. Legs are congruent, so they're equal. This is a leg, and this is a leg. Diagonals are congruent, so diagonals, that means from one side to the other, they're congruent, so they're equal. And lastly, base angles are congruent. So the base angles are this angle and this angle, so those are the bases. Those are equal. And then these 2 angles up here are the top bases. They're equal. So these 2 have the same measurement, and these 2 have the same measurement.